我哋審議第6個議題呢。
Well, we have come to the 6th item on the agenda. Funding requirements for a centralized electronic platform for the administration of mandatory provident fund registered schemes. I would like to invite Mr. Eddie Cheung, Deputy Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, to give us a briefing. Thank you, Chair. Well, there's quite a lot to say, so bear with me that I have to spend quite a lot of time, but you're welcome to interrupt me if you've got any questions. If I may first of all give you a summary of our proposal. We are proposing that we should use public money to develop the centralized platform to facilitate standardization, streamlining, and automation of MPF scheme administration process so as to maximize operational efficiency, reduce overall administration costs so as to create room for fee reduction. It is not just about an IT system. It is more than that. In fact, it's a change management process. We require 9 years to complete the project from 2019-20 to 2027-28. The average expenditure per year will be $0.37 billion. Our completion target year will be 2022 so that we have a secured and reliable centralized platform, and then we can start data migration thereafter. I'm going to give you the details about the estimates. That will include a one-off capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure for the first 8 years. And that will include expenses for the hardware, software, network connection, data centers, stringent testing, and measures to protect data security and related IT staff costs. The estimated savings is over $1.1 billion on average per year for 20 years. Other savings have not been included. That is not quantifiable. Savings have not been included. I'm going to talk more about the regulatory control, and the cost of such would also be reduced as a result of the platform. Let me give you some ideas about the background. Currently, we have got 4.3 million scheme members, both employees as well as retired employees who haven't withdrawn their accrued benefits, so they're still scheme members. So a total of 4.3 million scheme members, more than 9.6 million accountants. 14 trustees are overseeing 30 MPF schemes. Some trustees do not carry out the administrative work themselves. Rather, it has been contracted out to some administration platforms. So there are altogether 12 scheme administration platforms. Now, it means that it is quite decentralized. In other words, we haven't got standardized standards and processes. In other words, as far as efficiency is concerned, it is low. Every year, we have to carry out 30 million MPF transactions, like employer contribution and employee benefit withdrawal, or transfer of schemes, etc. And among the 30 million annual MPF transactions, 65% of them were paper-based. Now, this is a diagram to show you about the change that we would like to achieve. On the left-hand side, 14 trustees and 12 scheme administrators, shown in yellow. In the future, there would be one single platform, centralized one, and again it is colored yellow. But it doesn't mean that the trustees don't have any work to do. Well, they are trustees, and therefore they have what we call the fiduciary duties. The fiduciary duties still rest on the shoulders of the trustees, and they have to manage their investment. There are also other statutory requirements, say for example anti-money laundering measures will still be carried out by the trustees. Now for the centralized platform, what is it going to do? Well, it is an electronic administrative platform. Would like to centralize the processing of registration, enrollment, contribution, transfer of benefits, benefits withdrawal, and record keeping and maintenance. Another feature is that it will have an automated processing capability. Certain processes can be automated with one set of common standards instead of 12 different standards currently. For the platform to be built, there will be two major core systems. First of all, a central member register. All the members are registered, all the transactions. Another system is a payment system. For this central platform, we hope that each member will be given a unique MPF ID. So even when you change your job, you don't need to worry about verification of your identity. There is also a user interface connecting the trustees with the centralized platform. Now for the employees, that is the scheme members, they can make use of the interface to go on the platform to carry out what they need to do, like MPF contributions by employers for the employees, and then employees can also look at their contributions. Just now, we have sort of told you in writing what will be done by the centralized platform. Here, we are using a diagram to show you what is being planned. So we have the money flow, we have the member register. If someone would like to transfer to another fund, a directive can be sent to the platform. And then for the fiduciary duties on the part of the trustees, they're not going to be changed. There are a few points that I hope members will pay attention to. Our proposal is such that the MPFA should set up a company to own and operate the platform. But then it is not going to be a regulatee of the MPFA. It is only to be an entity to carry out the administrative work. For the public tender, there are two parts to it. First of all, the infrastructure. Second, with the establishment of the infrastructure, we need to find somebody to operate it, somebody who is familiar with the statutory requirements, and someone who is familiar with the MPF schemes. And then we need to formulate strategies and measures on data management and governance. We are not starting with a clean slate. In fact, we have already got a dozen or so sets of data. We need to group them together. In other words, we have to talk to the trustees, and there were a lot to be negotiated with the trustees. In a moment, I'm going to elaborate on this. I have said many times that is, the trustees continue to owe fiduciary duties to their scheme members. For us to carry out this change, it is no easy task. We face four major challenges. First of all, there is a need to have a major legislative overhaul. Other than the MPFSO, there are also other regulations under the ordinance covering many different arrangements, imposing a lot of duties on the trustees. So it's rather cumbersome as far as the administrative system is concerned. It's been up and running for 18 years. It is high time and excellent opportunity for us to examine as to whether we do need such cumbersome administrative steps. So we're going to streamline them, and then there is a need for legislative overhaul. Our guiding principles are as follows. We would like to maximize the operational efficiency, and in turn we can reduce the regulatory burden on the trustees, and in turn it can give us the potential to cut down on the fees. We have to face a lot of risks. We're talking about centralization of the management of a lot of data. So there is the concentration risk, and we need to make sure that there is data security. And we need to interface with 14 different systems. and the system itself cannot be suspended to wait for the transition. On the one hand, we need to be connected with 14 systems. On the other hand, we have to set up a new system, so it is going to be very complicated. Our guiding principle is that in the transitional period, the day-to-day operation should not be compromised. I think you will understand that we are talking about 9 million accounts, and for such a database, you would be worried about the data security. In Hong Kong, I think the public have high expectations of data security. We are going to invest heavily to make sure that the data will be given the protection that it needs, and then we can uphold the privacy of the scheme members. We are going to consult the Privacy Commissioner for personal data so that they are made aware of our up-and-coming change, so that they can advise us on data protection, and then we can be sure that we meet the relevant requirements. And then I'll talk about master data management and data governance. We'll do our utmost to maintain data integrity and accuracy, because we're talking about the hard-earned money of the employees. We cannot tolerate any errors, but then there is indeed a difficulty. Currently, the data is in the databases of the 14 trustees, is owned by them. So after the data has been transferred to the centralized platform, I think the trustees still require to use the data to carry out certain instructions. So how are we going to disseminate the data? Who owns the data? What is to be done to govern the usage of the data? And when there is an incident, who should be held liable? So we have to talk to the 14 trustees to come up with some protocols or agreements, and it will be highly complicated as far as the technical requirements are concerned. We have the benefit of having advice from the staff members of the OGIL. Another point is that if you have an excellent system and yet it is not going to be used by anybody, then it is not going to take us anywhere. Today, many employees are using digital approaches to deal with their transactions. 70 to 90% of the scheme members use digital means for change of investment instructions, but this case is not the same among the employers. The digital take-up on average is only 20 to 30% for employers. Say, for example, when they have to make contributions or when they have to fill out the forms, they would rather have a paper-based approach. In other words, it is manpower intensive and it may be prone to errors, and it is going to cost a lot of money. So the government, the MPFA, the trustees all have to work hard. We need the cooperation of the employers as well. The government has already carried out some proper education work for the 14 trustees for the employers. We hope that employers will have a higher digital take-up rate. In this way, the employees at the end of the day will benefit. I think on page 9 of our paper, if I remember correctly, after the extensive proper education, and if the employers are still not keen to use the digital approach, we may consider imposing a fee on those who still adhere to the paper-based approach. Probably you will say that we have to spend $370 million per year for 9 years. You may think that it requires a lot of money. Let me explain why we have to spend so much money on such an important decision. We have got a lot of detailed figures in our paper, but let me sort of give you a general idea. For the hardware, it will cost us $235 million. It is a reasonable figure because we are going to keep the information of 4 million scheme members and 9 million accounts. So the software would also cost us $265 million. And then for item C and D, implementation services and project and IT staff and consultancy services, that would cost us $1 billion. We need to carry out IT auditing. We have to examine the 14 systems. We have to look at their specifications, their design, to check whether they can interface with our new system. We have to install servers. We have to pay attention to network security, cyber security, etc. We need to carry out testing as well, and because we do have high standards of risk management, and we have zero tolerance for errors.
And project governance would require lots of resources, and we also have to conduct personal data analysis. So the project IT staff and consultancy services will incur these kind of expenditure. We also have miscellaneous and contingency. We're going to spend $1.5 billion on maintenance, communication network, and related expenditure. I'd like to go into greater detail about these 1.5. This is from 2019-20 to 27 to 28, over a span of 8 years. You have the hardware, software. They have to be maintained and updated. The data maintenance doesn't come cheap. Communication network, we have to have the speed and reliability. And what costs a lot of money is that we need to have security service 24/7. You might say that we may not need such stringent requirement. Now, we have to bear in mind that this is the financial data of the working population. So data security, cyber security will be very important. 24/7 security means that we can remedy the situation should anything goes wrong. We also need to have maintenance and stability. Now, 8 years spending $1.5 billion, it is a reasonable amount. Chairman, there are 22 pages in the paper, but it represents the FSTB, the MPFA, and the 14 trustees' continued efforts to take us where we are today. Let me say something about what happened over the past 6 years. In 2012, the MPFA conducted a consultancy study on the administrative costs, and the idea at that time was to set up this platform to reduce the fees and charges. And we have put together this centralized platform idea. The government agreed with this. In 2015, we started a feasibility study and analysis. The idea was we have to deal with this centralized platform in order to achieve best effectiveness. We also conducted a study in 2015 regarding the ownership, and in 2017 the Financial Secretary in his budget directed the FSTB to set up a working group on eMPF. The 14 trustees together with the government spent 18 months' time, and we completed the technical specifications in 2018. Our ultimate objective is to have the centralized platform up and running in 2022, and in 2018 we have the cost estimates for the system. That's why we find ourselves here today. Subject to the Council's support, the MPFA, like I said, we set up a company to take this forward, and we will be requesting for proposals and tendering exercise. Tender will be awarded in Q1 in 2020. System design and development will happen in mid-2020. In 2021, we hope that we will be able to submit the legislative amendment proposal to LegCo. We would expect massive overhaul of the law to streamline the administrative work. Now, 2021 remains a very ambitious target, but for the benefit of the working population, we'd like to aim to achieve that. And then in 2027, 2028, we will do the data cleansing and standardization and phased commencement of the centralized platform. A lot of the recurring expenditure would happen in 2027 and 2028. Now, this investment in infrastructure is borne by the government, but going forward, for the operational side of things, we will be charging the trustees, the 14 trustees, on a cost basis. There are 3 members, Mr. Chen Zhenying, Mr. Chen Yingbo, and Mr. Michael Look. 4 minutes for the Q&A, please. Mr. Chen. Chairman, thank you. Now, for the 4.3 scheme members, this will be more reliable. This will be more accurate. I think this is an investment well worth it. Now, this $3.37 billion for 9 years, contingency $240 million. It is only 7% of the total. It is taking such a long time. Now, normally when it comes to the PWSC and the FC, if it spends over 3 to 4 years, the contingency would be more than that. Do you have any buffer there in the different items of expenditure to cushion the unforeseen elements like inflation and rise in costs and so on? Now, the government will spend $3.4 billion to set up the system. For the 14 trustees, they have to make investment in the system to tie in with the government system. So, do you have any ideas how much they have to spend for the 14 trustees in order to get connected with this centralized platform? That would complete the picture for us. The last question is the digital take-up. In 5 years' time, you project 90% of take-up rate. There are a lot of assumptions there. If it doesn't pan out like this, you said that you're going to be levying a charge compared with a paper-based system and this electronic platform. How long do you think it would take for the two to exist in parallel? And how long do you think the two will exist in parallel for? Let me take the last question first. Now, for any digitalization, there are still a certain proportion of people who are not going to adopt this system. So we have set aside some of money to set up some service centers all over Hong Kong. If there are some who may not have a high level of IT readiness, and we will have these centers to help them. We cannot have too many of these centers because that will not save us any money. We have to strike a balance there. For the other two sums, I defer to Mr. Ching of the MPFA. Right, thank you, Chairman. To respond to Mr. Chen's question, for the contingency, like the Secretary said, the capital expenditure is 1.8 billion. The contingency is 1.7, about 10%. And from our understanding with the OGCIO, this is a normal projection. 10% would be needed for contingency. When it comes to the capital expenditure, I would like to have as accurate a projection as possible. But however accurate it is, we do need to have some element of contingency, and 10% is just about right. The other question by Mr. Chen is we are spending 1.8 billion. What about the trustees? Basically, if we set up this centralized platform, how much would that be? And for the 14 trustees, their expenditure will not be more than half. But how do they share the cost? It will depend on the scale. And we have to bear in mind that the money will be spent over a span of a couple of years. Now, these $1.8 billion, and maybe less than half, or $700–800 million, and they spend this amount over a span of a couple of years to get connected with our system. Mr. Chen Kim-po, Chairman, this massive mega project is going to stand the public in good stead. The government is funding it. I don't think for a massive scale project like this, it would be hard for any private entity to take the lead. It would be a good thing for the government to take the lead here. And we have the paper-based system in place for so long, and all of a sudden we're introducing this centralized platform. We need to have discussions with the sector. The key thing is the digital take-up rate, how many people will be converted into the system. As you said, 20–30% of the employers are still using paper-based check. For employees, a lot of them have gone digital. The trade has been trying very hard, but still cannot engineer any behavioral change. Now, you said that if the take-up rate is low, you have to impose some fees and charges. Do you have the power to impose fees and charges? Do you need to change the law? Second, now in 2022, it will be up and running. Like you said, this is a very ambitious idea. You may not be able to achieve that. Now, if you set it at 2032, then people may not be working as hard. But the thing is, the transitional period will be very long. You will be outsourcing the work. I think this is a right move. I can't imagine how the MPFA will have the expertise to do it. You will put this out for tender, and there will be a technological transfer afterwards. Some people from the sector suggest that they should be given a longer period of time, at least 10 years. If you allow them 3 years, nobody can be bothered. 5 years may not be attractive enough. 10 years, and they would devote all the necessary resources. I've got one other question here. In future, under this system, this platform, will the central authority be doing all the work, the paper-based work, and as well as the electronic work? Right, Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Chen, for his advice and questions. First, do we have the power to levy a sum on them if they stick to paper-based transaction? Under the law, we don't have the power. So the trustees can impose the charges. Yes, they can. Now, if they skip so many steps and impose the charges, there will be a backlash, and we have to engage in public education and take a step at a time. 2022, ambitious, but we still are confident about it. Like Mr. Chen said, the challenge lies with the transition. We have to move the data we do have the master data management, the MDM, that is terribly complicated. We have to make sure that the data is accurate. We have zero tolerance for inaccuracy. We don't underestimate the complexity at all. So who's going to take up the paper-based work? In 2016, the MPFA has already discussed a lot about this with the 14 trustees. There are 18 different administrative procedures, and there are certain bits that the centralized platform cannot do, or even if the platform does it, it may not be able to achieve any saving. And then we decide how we share the workload. We do have the plan there. As to the nitty-gritty, we will be discussing with the 14 trustees.
And it involves the standardization of the processes. We are glad to report that it is agreed that standardization can help to save the cost. We'll cut down on the use of paper, and we take this opportunity to see if there is a need to re-engineer the process. And as Mr. Chen has rightly pointed out, this is going to be a very important element and will continue with our study. We do have some consensus already, and what is needed is further fine-tuning. As to the digital take-up rate, perhaps Mr. Zhang from the MPFA would like to supplement. Mr. Zhang. Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Chen is concerned as to whether people would be willing to use the digital approach to deal with MPF-related matters. We have set up a working group, as Mr. Chen has said, and that has the membership from the 14 trustees. It will be a waste of resources if the centralized platform, though established, is not going to be patronized. So we hope that there will be an increasing digital take-up rate so that more and more will use the digital platform to carry out the transactions. Some trustees have done a good job, and for employees, on average, the take-up rate is between 70 and 80%. But then for employers, I think the case is very different. In some better cases, some trustees have almost 60% of their employer clients who have taken up the digital method. For others, it's less than 10%. So at the working group meetings, we did have a discussion to find out why is it that some trustees have succeeded in achieving a higher digital rate, and what other trustees can learn from them. And prior to the launching of the eMPF, the MPFA as well as the trustees will try our best to drive up the digital take-up rate. And we hope that the centralized platform will succeed. Thank you. Next, Mr. Michael Look. Thank you, Chair. So the government is going to put up more than $3 billion so as to introduce the eMPF centralized platform to deal with the MPF processes. It is said that we are going to save $1.1 billion per year. I want to know what's going to happen to the money saved. Is it going to be refunded? Is my mic switched on? I don't see a mechanism to refund the money to the scheme members. So MPFA, are you going to adopt this target that is try to lower the administrative fees? Well, since the launching of the DIS, I think across the board we have seen a downward adjustment of the administrative fees. I think currently it is 0.95%. You have got a 3-year cycle. I hope that on the first day of the 4th year, you can reduce the DIS, you can reduce the fees. And for the FTU, for many years, we have asked the administration to set up something like a central DIS. so that under the Hong Kong MA, for example, we can set up an arrangement so that the fee level is low and the return is stable, so that the scheme members can ask the trustees to take up such funds which would only cost them a small amount of money. So is the Hong Kong MA willing to explore this direction? And then I hope the MPFA would clarify this point. The Labour and Welfare Bureau has always said that by abolishing the offsetting mechanism, that mechanism, when it is to be abolished, it has to be aligned with the setting up of the EMPF. I doubt very much whether it is digital or not. I think the same can be done. Can you clarify this? Please clarify whether there is any relationship between the two. Secretary, or Deputy Secretary, let me clarify the relationship between the abolition of the offsetting mechanism and EMPF. Now, the government is saying that other than amending the Employment Ordinance, MPF, SO, as well as the OSO, we are saying that we have to mandate it on the employers to save up 1% of the employees' pay towards the severance payment as well as the long service payment. Now, it's a matter of mandatory savings, so we have to introduce a piece of legislation. There's another part to it, that is the government is going to have some subsidies for the SMEs. For the second point that I made, that would require legislative amendment. So it is going to be an important component. What is the relationship with the EMPF? This relationship with the EMPF, well, for us to ask the employer to contribute 1% more on top of the 5% of MPF, well, in other words, does it mean that it will be easier if the employer contributes 6% in a one-off sort of arrangement instead of going separate? I think whether you have an electronic platform, you could have done that. I think you can still have 6% contribution rate, and then it is simple. You just ask the trustee to take out 1% of the contribution. I think the MPFA is still too bound to clarify the position. Please also tell us what is our stance. I think probably has got nothing to do with the abolition of the offsetting mechanism. As I have said, the EMPF can help employers to contribute 1% more. For the dedicated account, I think it can help with the payment as well as the collection of contribution. So that's the relationship. As to the DIS, we have already promised that it is going to be reviewed in 3 years' time, and we would like to adjust downwards the level of fees. As to when we can actually introduce the new fee cap, it all depends on the legislative process. Can we redo it in the 4th year once the 3 cycle is completed? I can't say with certainty. All I can say is what we have promised to do. As to whether there is a mechanism to allow the employees, as a result of the EMPF, see a lowered cost level and then benefit from a reduction of costs. According to the ordinance, the MPFA is empowered to check the accounts of the trustees. Inspection visits can also be made. The MPFA is also enhancing the transparency. We are asking the trustees to tell us more about their costs as well as the fees. They should make it more transparent and there should be more disclosure. In other words, the scheme members can tell when all else remain the same as a result of the lowering of the administrative costs. There should be a downward pressure on the costs or the fees. And in fact, there will be a benchmarking effect. There will be pressure on other funds as well. And we would like to see a result which is open, fair, and just. For trustees, I think from time to time they can check whether there are appropriate investment strategies to be offered to the employees in Hong Kong. So it's a matter of the investment preference of the scheme members and whether the companies are interested in launching the type of fund that Mr. Look has mentioned. Perhaps the MPFA would like to supplement. Mr. Chen, just a quick point, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Look mentioned as to how, upon completion of the EMPF with cost savings, we can make sure that the benefits will go to the scheme members. The Deputy Secretary has mentioned a number of mechanisms. In fact, the MPFA is empowered to get information from the trustees. In other words, what would be or what have been included in the fees. We are currently getting information from the trustees to find out the major components of the fees, like the trustees' fees, administrative fees, fund management fees, custodian fees, the sponsors' fees, etc. We'll collect all the information and then we will be disclosing the information to both the scheme members as well as the public at large, so that for each and every fund, each and every scheme, we should be able to be transparent about the different components of the fees. And then the employees, the public would know. And in future, the EMFP will also be transparent. And it's easy for you to make a comparison with EMPF. We are only going to recover the cost. It is not going to be profit making. So it will be easy for you to tell by disclosing the information, by making it transparent. We believe that there will be pressure on the downward adjustment of the fees. Anybody wishing to ask questions or speak? Deputy Chair? Mr. Chen Kim-po. Thank you, Chair. Let's be mindful of the time. What about occupational schemes? I think is smaller in scale, more fragmented, and it involves a lot of paper. I want to know whether 10 years, 20 years down the road, trustees no longer have to take up any work and everything will be done at the center by the centralized platform. Mr. Zhang, thank you, Chair. Please take a look of this chart. As I have explained, the trustees still have to carry out certain functions. First of all, the fiduciary duties and some other statutory duties like anti-money laundering and then investment management. Yes, of course, I understand. Dealing with the contributions and also benefits withdrawal. Yes, the centralized platform will get the directions and then verify the information. Now, trustees have told us that what is most costly is to get the money from the employers. Now, our concept about the centralized platform is that we'll try our best to carry out most of the verification work. It is costly to get the contributions because you have to check the errors, you have to verify the figures, and you have to go after the employers for contributions. Well, once it is digitalized, we can issue reminders, and if it is not heeded, then no, you don't have to go into the details. What I want to say is that since you're going to cover the occupational schemes as well, in other words, the whole thing would be centralized. How much will be saved? You have given us a figure, but then that's for the long term. It is out of proportion. During the early days, since we have got two systems in parallel, So it will be after a long time when the centralized platform is the mainstay, then you will achieve greater cost saving. Is that the right understanding? I do not disagree, because we're talking about a transitional period. I don't have anything else to supplement. Thank you, Chair. Well, it's almost time, and if you don't have any other questions, I'm sure the government is going to refer the matter to the Finance Committee. In 2021, the administration is going to introduce the relevant legislative proposals to the LegCo. All right. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the MPFA's team for this item. Thank you.
好，咁啊，我哋
Item 7 then. Charging MPF approved trustees the annual registration fee.
Shall we call upon the Deputy Secretary to brief us on this? Yes, this was straightforward, Chairman. Our proposal is with effect from January 1st, 2020. The trustees will pay the ARF and the registration fee. Our proposal is that for the first 6 years, the ARF rate is pitched at 0.03% of net asset value. The ARF rate will be revised with effect from the 7th year after a review, with a view to achieving full cost recovery. I'd like to say that we are going to amend the legislation to prohibit trustees from charging any constituent fund of the scheme or a scheme member a new ARF fee item. In other words, they cannot pass on the charges. There is a transitional arrangement for the first payment. We propose January 1st, 2020, and they have to pay to give a report together with a fee 6 months after the period, and there are different date, and if the date is before the period, should they pay the fee on the 1st of January 2020? Now, if it is before 2020 January 1st, then they will have to pay in the following year. In terms of background, this is spelled out in 22B of the MPF SO, and the purpose is to provide MPFA with a stable source of income for achieving self-financing. The legislation makes it very clear that the ARF level must not be fixed at a level exceeding costs incurred or likely to be incurred in exercising or performing the functions. In 2017-18, actual relevant cost was about $0.46 billion, and we have a total NAF of $858 billion. For cost recovery, it should be pitched at 0.05%. We haven't collected any fee for the past 18 years. Now, what is our source of funding? Now, we have been relying mainly on the investment returns from the capital grant of $5 billion provided by the government in 1998. The balance is $3.22 billion. The sum will be depleted by 2024-25, so we see the need to charge the ARF. In other words, it is more like the license fee. We do have a high degree of transparency in the way of our expenditure. The budget has to be approved by the FS, and annual expenditure is included in MPFA's annual account. The legislation provides that MPFA has to be mindful of measures to improve its operational effectiveness and efficiency and report to the FS. To cut costs, in 2015-16, the FS has imposed a cap of $365 million on personal emoluments subject to inflationary adjustment. And to reduce rental costs, we have relocated the office premises from central business area to Kwaichung, save $50 million annually. We are recovering costs for managing the MPF compensation fund. We're collecting intermediaries' fees, but this is only tens of millions of dollars and will not be able to support the expenditure. Now, this is the balance sheet of an MPFA, which is available on the web. Now, let me say something about the review mechanism. First of all, the ARF cannot be any higher than the amount needed to operate the system, and we also have to take into account other fees payable to the MPFA, like the intermediaries' fees. We have a new requirement that the MPFA must prepare a corporate plan, and the plan has to include a budget of estimated expenditure for achieving those objectives stated in the plan. So we are playing the gatekeeping role and not allow the MPFA to charge more than is needed. We have consulted the trade, and they're not against the ARF per se, but they would like to have more time to get acclimatized to the new system. In particular, we prohibit them from passing on the charges. We have taken on board their views and would like to adopt a progressive incremental approach, and that's why we have a level of 0.03% for the first 6 years. In other words, this is half of the cost recovery. The trustees object to the proposed statutory ban on ARF fee item paid by scheme members, but to protect the interests of scheme members, we will maintain the original proposal. That's my quick presentation. I welcome questions from members. Right, Mr. Chenkinball, please raise your hand if you intend to take the floor. 4 minutes, please, Mr. Chen. I'm grateful to the administration for having discussed this with the trade. This is a huge amount of money, and the government is receptive to our views and reduce it to 0.03%. They would like to see this further lower to 0.02%. Now, how can we make sure that the MPFA is going to spend the money properly and there will not be any excessive expenditure on emoluments and so on? Perhaps we can do it like the SFC, that they would present the budget to us. I hope that the MPFA will also, like the SFC, present the budget to LegCo on an annual basis. You're going to put this under review, 0.03%. You're going to achieve cost recovery. Now you multiply this net asset value. It is $80 million, and the value will rise, and maybe 0.03% will yield enough revenue for you as the NAF rises. You said that the asset is rising and the administrative cost is going to be lower. The same logic should apply here. As the NAF rises, the percentage should not rise incessantly. Yes, we're proposing 0.03%. This is only half of the cost recovery, and this is reasonable. 0.02%, is it reasonable? I think we can have a good debate. Let's go when we present the bill to LegCo. Presenting a budget to the FA panel, we find this acceptable. As Mr. Chen said, the SFC, the Insurance Authority, they do have similar arrangement. We are prepared to consider it. Third, review. It is true that the asset will expand as time goes by. Each year we have $300, $400 additional contribution. By the seventh year, maybe we don't really need to put this up beyond 0.03%. If for some circumstances we need to increase it, maybe we're going to have a slight increase. In the long run, there is a likelihood that this will be adjusted downward. I agree with Mr. Chen's observation. Anything else? No? If not, according to the paper, in the first quarter of 2019, the administration will be submitting the amendment bill to the Council. Any comments on this proposal? Well, I agree with that in my capacity as a member of the FAP, not in my capacity as chairman of the Finance Committee. Right then, so much for this item. Let's move on next to the proposal to improve the rate concession. Right, you're raising your hand to speak.
OK， 好啊，我哋請局長，你
Secretary. Modifications to the rate concession mechanism. Chairman, thank you. Members, the paper is about the rates concession for a couple of years. May not be solidly, but for a couple of years we did have the rates concession. Last year there were members who made the points that the rates concession should be done in a more equitable manner. There are some people, some consortium who may have multiple rateable properties, hundreds of rateable properties, and they still can enjoy all these concessions, and there seems to be a perception that it is not equitable and we cannot achieve social justice. That there is a suggestion that we should limit the number of rateable property to one per owner. We did consider various models to deal with this kind of situation. After discussion of the five models, I think the more desirable, the model that can be further discussed is the one that limit the number of properties to one per owner. And if they own multiple properties, they can only have one. Let's say there are the ownership is split three ways. They can nominate one of the co-owners to become the one to enjoy the concession. And this is how we deal with individuals. Now, for companies, if we allow one property for each company, then the second and third property held by the company will not enjoy any rates concession. So like individuals, the company would only have one single rateable property that will enjoy the concession. Now for companies will not look at the ultimate beneficial owner, because that would be terribly complicated. That this proposal is complicated in itself, because under the rate concession mechanism, we do it on the basis of the individual, the unit that is making the payment. If we have to look at the ultimate beneficial owners, then we will have to ascertain how many properties are held by a company. In paras 11, 12, and 13, we have explained the exchanges with members on informal occasion. So in paras 12 and 13, we've mentioned members' concerns on in various areas.
So 我哋都係
We are happy to hear from members as to what you think about the proposals. This is merely a paper for discussion. It is not a formal proposal. So it's merely a sort of opportunity for us to exchange the views with the electrical members. Thank you. Yes. Secretary, have you finished? That's it for the time being. The first to speak, Mr. Horace Chang. If I may read out the order of members to speak. Dr. Lo Wai Guok, Chen Kin-po, Kenneth Leung, and Ronica Chen. Mr. Chen, please. 4 minutes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, 4 minutes for both the question and the answer. Thank you, Chair. As the Secretary has said, it is not really a formal proposal. This is merely a matter of facilitating our discussion. Can you hear me? Well, what we used to have is such that you can own limitless rateable properties. Now the change is going to be drastic. It will be cut down to one only. When you briefed us on the picture, it seems that you have a lot of reservations. You don't take a favorable view. You have told us that tenants cannot benefit, and then for the new arrangement, we still cannot prevent the fact that some property owners may still enjoy multiple rates concessions. And then it is not easy for the new owners or new tenants to submit the information, and we have to set up a new computer system to deal with the data. So you have set out a lot of negative consequences. So must we make a choice between one rateable property and limitless rateable properties? Well, I think electrical members and the public queried the existing mechanism because property owners and large corporations can save tens of billions of dollars by way of rates concession. It is not quite equitable. On the other hand, for some middle-class households, they don't own a lot of properties, maybe 1, 2, or 3. They live in one of them, and then another one for a family member, and then the third one may be for their business, and that can be used to get a cash flow from the bank. So, Secretary, can you consider the following? Instead of a choice between two, can we restrict the number to 2 or 3 so that middle-class households owning a couple of properties can still benefit from this policy? And we don't want to drive an wedge between the landlords and the tenants. You said that the tenants are not going to benefit. Now, if the landlord pays the rates, then the concession will be refunded to the landlord. If the tenants pay the rates, then the tenants should benefit. I don't think you should have a broad brush approach and say that all tenants cannot benefit from the concession scheme. Mr. Chairman, the member said that it seems that it's a choice between 1 and infinity. We did consider this aspect. We did consider different options. One possible way to go about it is that the same owner may own 2 or 3 rateable properties. But if we allow that, it is going to complicate the system. They have to make a declaration and we have to verify the number of properties owned, whether it is 2 or 3. In other words, in terms of operations, that would be the case. And there are also some other views telling us that for the tenants, well, there was this argument. If a tenant pays the rates, then tenants should be entitled to the rates concession. However, our understanding, according to the figures, is such that, generally speaking, for residential properties, only 4% of the tenants pay the rates. In other words, it is a convention that we are talking about inclusive rent. The landlord will pay the rent for 96% of the cases. That's the case for the residential properties. For commercial properties, it's sort of half-half. That is, the rates is paid by 50% of the tenants and 50% of the landlords. Of course, there was another suggestion. As long as the tenant pays the rates, then the tenants should be given the benefit. And in fact, the tenancy agreements are up for renewal very quickly, like once every 2 years, and they can easily turn it from an exclusive one into an inclusive one, or vice versa. So you can just refund the tenants irrespective of the status. So I'm afraid all such suggestions will only go to complicate the system. For us to develop such a system, it will take $200 to $300 million. Instead of property-based, it would become owner-based. And for such a system to have a function to meet the various criteria mentioned, it means that it is going to cost us more every year. We did consider such possibilities, and as you have noted in our paper, we talked about other options, say, for example, confining it to domestic properties, etc. Our starting point is to make it simple. We don't want to make it too complicated. Therefore, as of now, our suggestion is still keeping to a simple version. Mr. Lo Wai-Kwok. Mr. Chairman, there are voices asking for a change to the rates concession arrangement, accusing it of being inequitable. I don't favor such an approach. If you say that this is not equitable, I have to tell you that in fact it is very fair. Now, if you get $2,500 as a concession for one property, if you own 2, then it is $2,500 times 2. If you have got 3 properties, you multiply it by 3. If you hate others just because they're wealthy, I don't think this is the right approach. It has been said that for the top 10 rate payers, you talk about the fact that they were having inclusive rents. Can you sort of give us an idea what is the difference if they have the rates concession and if they have not? Do you have a figure for that? Mr. Who will answer this question. According to information we have given to you, for the top 10 ratepayers, for the rates concession that they have received, it is about $250 million. So how much have they paid? I have to look up the information. It would be a few times. Why haven't you given us this figure? For the top 10 ratepayers, according to the information of the RVD, 80% of the tenancies are rates exclusive. Mr. Chairman, that takes me to another point. For the so-called top 10 ratepayers, so they are paying the largest amount of rates and they get the largest amount of concession. Information shows that 82% of the tenancies are rates exclusive. In other words, the tenants are paying the rates, and they are mostly non-domestic properties. Now, the government seems to be fully justified, and I buy the idea. That is, the tenants will stand to gain, and many of them are in fact SMEs. So for this system, for the current system, as the administration has said, when there is a surplus, it is hoped that across the board, all walks of life can benefit, can share the fruits, like the grassroots, the middle class, and the SMEs, etc. Now, for us to make a change so that it is confined to one rateable property only, then you will have this very odd scenario. You may rent a shop space to sell fish balls. The landlord will tell the shop owner, you are not going to have the rates concession because I own many properties. I'm going to choose one to benefit from rates concession, and yours hasn't been chosen. So what's going to happen? I think everybody will set up a new company so as to own one property. It is going to be very intrusive, and it is going to have it topsy-turvy if you talk about social justice. And then for many middle-class households, the couple will work very hard to own their own home for their retirement. They may also live on the rental income from one or two more properties. You see many such middle-class households in City 1, Sha-Tin City 1, etc. Now, if you say that if you own more than one rateable properties, you shouldn't get rates concession for the second property, it is unfair. I'm sure many of them will take to the streets to demonstrate against this. Secretary, please give us a very short reply. We are fully aware of members' concerns, that is, whether it is equitable, whether it is fair to the tenants, and what about the interests of the middle-class families and the SMEs. As we have explained, if you talk about social justice, it is not an absolute case of social justice. Mr. Kenneth Leung, Deputy Chair. Secretary, please estimate the following. Now you're going to have to make a change. A few years back, it was said that we didn't have to check the documents when it came to property transaction. But for many years, we have still to get that particular system. For our rating and valuation system, it was well regarded by many other countries. Now you talk about a cost of a few $100 million. I want to know how much time it will take to convert the system, and is it a sort of a fair figure to give us $200 to $300 million? And then In addition to individual owners, there are also onshore companies, offshore companies, trusts, etc. that own properties. In other words, you need to have two different rating and valuation systems. Would that complicate rather than simplify things? And then on the principle of equity, if somebody owns a couple of 200, 300 square foot properties, vis-a-vis somebody owning a 3,000 square foot property, what is to be a fair arrangement? To me, maybe I don't favor rates concession. You pay the rates. Either you lower the rate of the rates. I think by cutting the rate itself, you don't have to talk about concession or rebate. If you don't have any surplus this year, why don't you sort of say that you cap it at $1,000 or $500? Have you ever considered such possibilities?
主席關於嗰
Secretary. Yes, about the computer system. This is only a preliminary discussion, and we are projecting in simple terms that it's going to take us 2 years to modify the computer system, and as I said, it's going to cost us something like $300 million, and this system will not achieve the level that you refer to, because this is only changing the handling of the data. Chairman, you asked, you said that either we don't do it, or we should, or if we do it, we have to do it across the board. A raise is payable in order to pay for the municipal services. Raise concession doesn't happen every single year. It would depend very much on the financial situation, the fiscal situation. And it's not appropriate for us to deal with this raise concession mechanism in a regular manner. As the FS said earlier on in the meeting, if you compare it with the projection in February 28th, it was $40 billion, but last year we ended up with $140 billion, and so the situation will be it's likely to be vastly different. I have received from Mr. Kenneth Leung a motion in relation to this item, and I will bring this item to a close after this motion. Mr. Chen Chen-ying. Chairman, thank you. Raise is a kind of tax on the property, is a form of indirect tax. Last year, the budget announces the one-off waiver of raise for 4 quarters. It is on a one-off basis. It's not really something dispersed from the coffers. I don't think it makes sense for people to say that we're returning wealth to the wealthy. The government's proposal is that if one owns multiple flats, then one has to make declaration and select the property to enjoy the concession. And this is really disruptive to the residents. Now, for those who have to pay rates, then they should be entitled to concessions. Now, this proposal would deprive them of the right, in particular the residents who own the property in their own names. Now, for the big landlords, they may hold the property in the name of companies. Some of them would be able to hide the ultimate beneficial owners. And for these cases in which the government finds it difficult to trace the owner, the government will exempt them. And I think the government is penalizing those who are holding the companies, holding the properties in the form of a company in a transparent manner. And we're going to have to build up the system to the tune of $200–300 million for these one-off measures that may or may not happen every single year. Is it really money well spent? With this system in place, there will be a lot of complaints, a lot of inquiries that the administration has to handle. I'm sure that the resources will be considerable. There are some residents who own one single property individually or in the name of a company. You're making them file a declaration. And this system from all angles is not worth supporting. So I'd like to say to the Secretary that if you want to have an equitable system, please come up with a model to tackle the unfairness in the entire system. If you cherry pick a little bit here and tinker around the edges, it's not fair. Secretary? Yes, Chairman, we understand members' concerns, and these measures to achieve social justice is very, very difficult to implement because of all manner of constraints. So we have to be cautious when considering members' suggestions, and we have to consider the feasibility. Mr. Wuchiwai. Chairman, thank you. There are a couple of things here. I remember that all along with regard to the debate on rates concession, we have been focusing on the developers who haven't quite sold their units, and they stand to benefit from the rates concession. And also the large enterprises, and they have shopping malls, and they will stand to benefit from the concession in a massive way. Now, I'm not sure what are you going to do with the vacancy tax. Maybe that would in itself address the problem there. As to the developers or the conglomerates who own shopping malls, the administration said that 80% of these tenancies, there would be an automatic pass on of the concession. So the concession doesn't go to the developers, it goes to the operators of the premises. Beg your pardon. So my question then is, under this new model, I can't see how you can address the scenario where 80% of the developers would pass on the concessions, and for the concessions that passed on to the individual operators in 80% of the cases, that will be gone. The concession that passing on of the benefits will be gone. Now, this is not really the focus of our attention. I don't think anybody would be saying that we have to come up with a system where the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises or otherwise would be able to benefit from the system would be losing their concessions. Rather, we are dealing with the grossly unfair scenarios. So in option 1, how can you make sure that the operators themselves would be able to claim the concessions that they are otherwise entitled to? With this system, we're not sure when it will be used. If it is not in use, would it be sitting idle? Now, if it is sitting idle, it would be a very funny scenario. We want to build this system and is exclusively used for these purposes. Now, if there is no concession of rates, will the system be sitting idle? Secretary, Chairman, Mr. Wu has highlighted a key point that we talked about the developers, the top 10 rate payers, that they include the charitable organizations as well. We said that in 82% of the tenancies, these are non-domestic premises, they are rates exclusive, and the concessions are rebated to the tenants themselves. The idea is not so much to penalize these tenants. Now, for those who are non-tenants, there are some developers who own more properties, and they are developing a project with 1,000, 2,000 units, and that are about to be launched in the market. And they have to be responsible for the rates. And some members argue that this is the unfairness, where the unfairness lies, because they're holding on to the properties and they are enjoying this concession. This year it is $2,500 for 4 quarters. Now, there are some who are paying rates in a massive way, and just because they have multiple properties, they would not be able to enjoy all the concessions. Mr. Wu talked about the vacancy tax, and this is really the point. At the moment, we are going to be rolling out the vacancy tax. Announcement has been made, but then we have to have the system in place for this to happen. The vacancy tax will be able to tackle the situation where the developers are hanging on to the properties. The vacancy tax is a form of rates in itself, and it is a massive amount of rates to hit the developers really hard, so that they will feel the pinch. So we're talking about social justice, whether it is equitable. So there would be a different perception of fairness from different angles. That's where the problems lie. That's precisely the reason why we'd like to bring this up for discussion. There are indeed conflicting views, and members are really at odds with one another over these particular issues. It would be very hard for us to come up with something that would be fair and equitable all round, because there are different perceptions of fairness. Mr. Pt2, Chairman, thank you. Well, this is about the rates concession, and it is suggested that this be restricted to 1 property per owner. Many members advance their arguments. I'm sure that we have had a lot of arguments in society. Those who are in favor of the government's option are saying that for the top 10 rate payers, they should not be allowed to enjoy so much concession. Now, from the Secretary, for the top 10 rate payers, Some of them are charitable organizations, and 80% of the tenancies of the top 10 ratepayers, they would rebate the concessions to the small tenant operators. Now, they have rented out these premises to the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and they are paying the rent, and the rates are not really taken up by the landlords themselves. It is the tenant that are paying the rates. Now, if you restrict this to one property per owner, it would be gross unfair to the small-time operators. They have been contributing to the rates, but when it comes to concession, they are left out of the loop. So I think you are really disregarding the small-time businesses. The FS said earlier on that we're going to have 10% increase in inbound tourism, 60 million people. It sounds really good.
However, I have to say that I have been in close contact with different sectors because I do represent them. And for many people in the retail industries, they have told me that things don't look good. Well, instead of having a double-digit growth rate, it has become a single-digit. And recently, it is a mere 4 or 5% in terms of the growth rate. Well, the number of visitors has increased by 10%, but then for the retail figures, the growth rate has become a single-digit one. Well, for the U.S. mainland trade conflict, of course, it has an impact on us. And then in March, or from March up to now, the currency rate has changed by over 10%. So mainland shoppers don't find Hong Kong prices as favorable as it was in the past. And then there is also this confidence crisis as the U.S. mainland trade conflict is still affecting us. So on the face of it, tourism is booming with more visitors, but we in the retail sectors don't get more business. For the race concession, I hope you will bear in mind that the business sector don't have the perception that they've been left out. So I don't agree with your proposal at all. And then some others have said that sometimes elderly couples worked hard to buy two properties, one for themselves to live in, the other probably a tenement building, and they live on their rental income instead of relying on CSSA. So what about their difficulties? Secretary, I think for members' analysis, I think to a large extent we do agree with you. The FS earlier on gave you a briefing. In other words, we are not that optimistic concerning the economic prospects. When it comes to concessionary measures, it all depends on the size of the fiscal surplus this year and next year. And when it comes to the question of being equitable, we are fully aware of members' concerns. So, Secretary, you come here to listen to members' views, right? And you haven't got any solutions for members' questions, right? I think we have to bear in mind the budget as a whole. All right, next, Mr. Elvin Young. Thank you, Chair. For us to have this discussion today, of course, it is all because we have got very different views over the years concerning race concession. Members have laid out their arguments. For the Secretary to take the first step forward at least to try to deal with what is regarded as social injustice. You have my sort of recognition. At the same time, I don't think we should affect SMEs, tenants, or others who don't always get the most in the society. I think we have to bear in mind the original sort of concerns of members. For some who benefit disproportionately, whether individuals or corporations, I think the focus is on what to do to deal with such a phenomenon. Both the Secretary and other members have said that in the coming years, or take the next year, 2019, 2020 as an example, we may not expect many concessionary measures, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be ready with a system so that the administration understands accurately who owns the properties as well as the relationship among the owners. So it's a matter of setting up a system to understand the relationships. And one day, when the public finance improves and if the administration would like to return the wealth to the people, then we have a system already in place to deal with that. And even if we haven't got anything to return to the public, it won't be a bad thing to have a system ready to understand better the ownership. Now, whether we have option 1, option 2, etc., none of them is perfect. The Civic Party is of the view that we shouldn't go to the extreme. Don't confine it to one rateable property only. Ordinary citizens may own 2 properties. So it's a matter of fine-tuning. For you to set up a system, I think what you have said in your paper is in the right direction. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Young, for his question. As to what Mr. Young has said, I think you do have a point. However, I have to point out that there are indeed very good intentions. However, we find a problem here. Just now, many members have spoken, and in the past, we did have an informal exchange of views. There are certain concepts involved in the discussion. It's a matter of value judgment. It seems that we set out to penalize someone. Who are we going to penalize? And we say that we want to be equitable. At the same time, we don't want to victimize the tenants. Say, for example, tenants should be entitled to the raise concession, as some members have pointed out. And then, if we don't want to hurt anybody in the crossfire, it is said that maybe a middle-class household owns 2 properties, one for their own use, another for their parents, another for the children, etc. Or we are talking about a household having 2 different units within the same housing development, and we should cater for such scenarios, it was said. Now, there are so many different components that members have urged us to bear in mind, and they shouldn't be sort of hurt while we try to achieve social justice. Now, at first we have come up with a simple arrangement, but then as a result of the concerns of members, and since we want to sort of deal with your concerns, so we have come up with a very complicated sort of system, trying to fine-tune it. But the resulting system would be very, very complicated. And as a result, it will be February next year that you can start making an application. And here we would like to be as equitable as possible and would like to uphold social justice. But we find that it will be very difficult to carry out such fine-tuning. And that's why we would like to have a discussion with you and let you know as to why we have to live with this less than equitable system. If no other members would like to speak, let's deal with the motion proposed by Mr. Kenneth Leung, our Deputy Chair. I have taken a look of his motion. I think it is directly related to this agenda item. So members, do you agree to handle his motion? Do we have a quorum? So we agree to deal with the motion. While you ring the bell, I can give an explanation. Well, I'm merely talking about option 1. It is not the same as saying that we shouldn't talk about this. It's a matter of allocation of resources and a fair allocation of resources. Now, what I'm saying is that for the implementation of option 1, it may not uphold the principle of being truly equitable. And then for the administration to set up a new property ownership system, it may not be in line with the principle of value for money. You have to spend $200 to $300 million to set up such a system. Therefore, I would like to ask the administration to suspend the consideration of this option. So I'm merely talking about option 1. It's not the same as asking the administration to shelve the entire discussion. In fact, the administration can explore other ways to share the fruits of economic development with the public.
Aye.
Sorry, speaker is off mic. Sorry, the speaker is off mic. Well, we have read the motion proposed by the Deputy Chair. He's saying that we should not pursue option 1. In other words, we can consider the other options, option 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. I think to me, really, option 1 isn't quite going to work. So it's this particular option.
喺度4分鐘我就要講投乜嘢㗎啦。
係舉手。
未夠可能冇得6個。
要響足5分鐘㗎，因為你叫咗5分鐘 bell 咧，就算夠 quorum 都要等5分鐘。
如果5分鐘都教咗定未教人咧？
咁投唔到㗎啦。係3個啫未㗎，但係你要響足5分咯。嚇，即係大家唔好走咯。
仲爭2個。
唔係爭，你都計㗎嘛一邊。
佢唔得啊
？quorum 係可以所有議員都得㗎嘛，佢都自己可以投㗎，你都可以投㗎，任何人都可以投。 鐘啦，你就睇下係咪贊成咧？投票舉手。
啊，
舉手啦。
好啊，第
Members, in relation to Mr. Kenneth Leung's motion, would like to put the matter to the vote. Hands up, please, those who are in favour.
OK， 得，咁我讀。
Those in favour, Chairman, Vice Chairman, Mr. Shukafai, Mr. Kwok, Mr. Chan, five votes. Objection? Mr. Alvin Young, abstention. One abstention. So the motion is carried. Right, so this motion by Mr. Kenneth Leung is carried. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item, proposed revision of fees and charges for the services under the Customs and Excise Department. Right, we'll move on to item number 6. Proposed revision of fees and charges for the services under the Customs and Excise Department. Ms. Pervin Yong, Principal Assistant Secretary, please. Chairman, the paper is very straightforward. There are 17 items of fees that will be adjusted under the Dutiable Commodities Ordinance or Regulation and the Motor Vehicles Ordinance. They have to do with the license fees, registration fees, and certificate fees, and so on. It's got nothing to do with livelihood issues. And they have to do with the traders, the distributors, and importers that will be affected. Simply put, the government would apply the user pays principle. The last revision was done in 2015. We still haven't quite achieved cost recovery. So we are proposing the revision by between 10 to 20%. And the cost recovery ratios will be something like 30 to 80%. The impact on the trade would be rather minimal. When we proposed the fees revision, we have taken into account the fact that under the electronic licensing system, the efficiency will be ramped up, and this has also been taken into account in the fee revision, and that will, in a way, limit the rate of increase. We have consulted the relevant stakeholders, and no adverse comments have been received. Subject to members' agreement, the fee revision, 14 of them under 109, they will be subject to negative vetting. For those under cap 330, we will be gazetting them for implementation. Thank you. Any comments? Mr. Michael, look, you are the only one here. You've got 4 minutes and 4 minutes, multiple 4 minutes. No comments? If not, according to the paper, gazetting will be done in January 2019 to announce the fees revision. And for 14 items, subsidiary legislation will be introduced to the floor of the Council. Any comments on the proposal? On his left. I would agree then. Thank you all very much. So that's it for this item. AOB, we don't have any AOB items. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.